Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. I'm excited for this deep dive. We're taking a look at Sunan An-Nasa'i, Volume 4.
It's a fascinating collection.
And I know you've done a lot of research on this.
Hmm.
For me personally, I'm really interested to see what it says about marriage and family and even things like inheritance and social conduct. And I know a lot of our listeners share those interests.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how these texts, from centuries ago can still offer insights into these challenges that, we still face as human beings today.
Yeah, it really does speak to some really timeless issues.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with Sunan An-Nasa'i, could you give us a little bit of background? Like what makes it so important, in the world of Islamic scholarship?
Sure. So An-Nasa is one of the 6 major hadith collections.
Mm.
Hadiths are the sayings and actions and stories about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And this collection was put together by Imam An-Nasa'i, who was a scholar. He lived in the 9th century, and it's known for being really, really rigorously authenticated. He really scrutinized all the chains of narration. So every story in here, you can trace it back and be pretty sure that it goes back to the Prophet.
So it's like a historical detective story almost.
Yeah, kind of.
That's so cool. So it's considered a cornerstone of Islamic jurisprudence.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. So this particular volume, Volume 4, what kinds of topics does it cover?
Well, it goes into marriage, family life. It talks about choosing a spouse, consent,
Okay.
rights and responsibilities, even the etiquette of marital relations, which is interesting.
Okay. Now you've really piqued my interest.
Yeah.
I definitely want to dive into that.
Yeah.
One thing that jumped out at me, just kind of in my initial read, was how much emphasis there is on a woman's religious commitment when it comes to choosing a spouse.
Yes, definitely. There are a lot of hadiths that advise men to, really prioritize a woman's piety and character, even over things like wealth or beauty,
Right.
which are often, the things that people focus on.
Yeah, those more superficial qualities.
Right.
Yeah.
So, there's one hadith that says, the Prophet said, a woman is married for 4 things: her wealth, her family status, her beauty, and her religion. So choose the religious woman. May your hands be rubbed with dust.
May your hands be rubbed with dust.
Yeah, it's pretty strong imagery.
It's very emphatic. It's like, this is really important. Don't mess this up.
Yeah, shared values and commitment to faith are the foundation.
Yeah, definitely. And this applies to both men and women when they're choosing a spouse.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. I also noticed that there are chapters dedicated to the Prophet's marriages,
Yes.
including, polygamy, which is something that obviously generates a lot of discussion today.
It does. And it's important to remember that those marriages, they happen in a particular context, like a historical and social context.
Right. Yeah.
And, it wasn't necessarily about personal gratification.
Yeah.
A lot of times it was about things like social welfare,
Right.
providing support for widows and orphans, things like that.
Okay. Yeah. It was a very different time.
Yes, absolutely.
And there are a lot of, opinions on how it applies to us today.
Yes, definitely. And it's a matter of ongoing discussion and interpretation.
And it's important to acknowledge that and to, approach it with respect for those different perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But moving on to something, maybe a little less controversial, I was really struck by the emphasis on consent before marriage.
Yes.
It seems that even back then, a woman's voice and her choice were really recognized.
Definitely, yeah. There are hadiths about that. For example, there's one where a woman comes to the Prophet and she says, my father has married me off against my will. And the Prophet gives her the right to choose, whether she wants to stay or not.
Wow. So she had agency.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's really powerful.
And this is in a very, patriarchal society.
Yeah. So it set a precedent that even, in a society like that, her autonomy and her right to choose was really important.
Yeah, really important.
Okay. So forced marriage is, explicitly prohibited.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also came across this hadith about a man who's asking the Prophet about marrying a jealous woman.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And instead of advising him one way or another,
Right.
the Prophet says that he'll pray for her to overcome her jealousy.
Yes. I love that one.
Right. It's such a compassionate response.
It is.
And it shows that, these personal challenges, even like jealousy, can be addressed through prayer, through asking for divine intervention.
Yeah. Really interesting.
And a very different approach than, maybe what we're used to thinking about today.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also a hadith, I think this one's kind of funny, but it's also like kind of a warning. It's the one about the man with two wives,
Oh, yeah.
and he favors one over the other.
Uh-huh.
And the prophet says that, he'll be resurrected with half of his body leaning.
It's a stark image.
It's a very, physical consequence. Yeah. Right. So it's like, it really emphasizes how important it is to be just.
Yes, justice and fairness.
And fair, right, to your wives.
Yeah.
Especially, if you're choosing to enter into a polygamous marriage.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about, choosing a spouse, consent, polygamy.
Yeah.
What about divorce?
Yeah.
I know Volume 4 also talks about that.
It does. It talks about divorce. It outlines the different types of divorce.
Okay.
And, when it's permissible and what are the rights and responsibilities during and after a divorce.
So it gets into the nitty-gritty a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the concepts that it talks about is Ida, which is the waiting period that a woman observes after a divorce.
All right.
Or even after her husband dies.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what's the purpose of that waiting period?
Sure. It serves a couple of purposes. One is emotional healing, a time to reflect, process the separation,
Sure.
Adjust. But it also, ensures that there's no confusion if the woman becomes pregnant. Oh, okay.
During that time. And then it also, sometimes allows for reconciliation.
Oh, interesting.
If the couple wants to get back together.
Okay.
The duration of it depends, on the circumstances.
Oh, okay.
So the hadiths kind of go into that.
Okay. Interesting. So it's really about, not just cutting things off right away.
Right.
It's about allowing time for that process.
Yes, exactly. It's a
And
process.
that for potential reconciliation.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I know the book also gets into different types of divorce,
It does.
like revocable and irrevocable, and the pronouncements that are needed for those. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, in Islamic jurisprudence, there are different types of divorce,
Mm-hmm.
and each one has its own rulings, right? So revocable divorce is one where there's still a chance to reconcile
Oh, interesting.
within a time frame. But an irrevocable one
More permanent.
is a more permanent thing.
Mm.
And the hadiths kind of outline, what are the procedures, the pronouncements,
Right.
so that it's done correctly. It's done in a valid way.
Yes.
So it's really interesting to see how these teachings, provide guidance for something that can be really emotionally difficult and challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a framework for that.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Okay, so we've talked a lot about marriage and divorce.
Yeah.
But I know that Volume 4 goes beyond family matters.
It does.
Right. It touches on a lot of other aspects of social conduct.
Yeah, for sure. So it talks about things like fulfilling oaths, giving gifts, even things like training horses and avoiding consuming an orphan's property.
Right.
So really practical things like how do you live an ethical life?
It's like a guide to life, really.
Yeah, in a way it is.
Wow. And that's where this concept of Ihsan comes in.
Yes, exactly.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, Ihsan is often translated as excellence or doing good, but it's deeper than that, right? It's about approaching, everything with this sincerity, striving to do what's right, what's pleasing to God, even if it's something really small.
It's like that intentionality.
Yes, intentionality, exactly.
It makes me think of that hadith where the prophet says, verily, Allah has prescribed ihsan, perfection, in all things. So if you kill, kill well. And if you slaughter, slaughter well.
Yeah, even in acts that are kind of, maybe harsh, we should do it with skill and compassion.
Minimize the harm.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And treat the creature with respect.
That's powerful. And this Ihsan idea, it's not just about how we treat animals.
No, it's not. It's how we treat everybody.
Right.
There's this hadith that says, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so it's about empathy, compassion.
Yeah, it's recognizing that everyone's worthy of that same kind of love and respect
Yes, absolutely.
that we want for ourselves.
Definitely.
Okay? There are a couple of stories from this section of the book that I just have to share because they really stood out to me. One's about a man who's fighting in battle, and he dies because his own sword recoils on him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's like a tragic accident, right?
Right.
But the prophet clarifies that he's still a martyr.
Yes, because his intention was to fight for a just cause.
Yeah, so it's really about the intention,
Exactly.
even when the outcome is unexpected.
Yeah, it's a good reminder for us.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a reminder that, we should really strive to have that sincerity and trust in God.
Absolutely.
That even if things don't go according to plan, that there's still that possibility of, reward.
Yeah. It's about trusting in his wisdom and his mercy.
Yeah. Um, the other story that I wanted to mention is about the sanctity of the wives of those who are fighting in jihad.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a hadith that's like a warning about betraying their trust
Yes.
and emphasizes like really serious consequences for doing that.
Yeah, because, the men are away fighting and they're entrusting their wives to the community. Right. And so breaking that trust is a very serious thing.
Yeah, it highlights that community responsibility
Yeah.
and the importance of like really strong bonds of trust.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about jihad.
Okay.
Um,
Big topic.
it is a big topic. It's something that's really often misunderstood
Yes.
and even misrepresented.
Yeah.
So what does Volume 4 actually say about jihad?
Well, it emphasizes that there are multiple forms of jihad.
Okay.
So the one that we hear about most is, the armed struggle
Right.
for self-defense
Right.
or for a just cause.
Right.
But that's just one aspect.
Okay.
There's also what's called the greater jihad.
Okay.
And that's, your internal struggle
Oh, okay.
against your own, weaknesses.
So it's like that personal struggle.
Exactly. It's a personal struggle against your desires, your ego.
Right. So it's not just about warfare.
No, not at all.
Okay. What about the hadiths that do talk about, actually fighting?
Well, they talk about, making sure that there's a just cause.
Okay.
Minimizing harm to civilians,
Yeah.
treating prisoners of war humanely, things like that.
So there's an ethical framework even within that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And, the decision to engage in that is not something to be taken lightly.
Right.
It requires a lot of, consultation with scholars
Yeah.
and leaders.
And a really deep understanding of
Yeah.
those principles.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a lot more nuanced than this kind of like simplistic holy war idea that sometimes gets thrown around.
It really is, yeah. It's about understanding the context, the interpretations, the ethics. It's
Yeah.
all very important.
Okay. Speaking of ethical conduct, there's also this hadith that talks about, the consequences of accusing someone of adultery.
Yes. Very serious consequences.
Right.
And this is about protecting people's reputations.
Right. Avoiding slander.
Yeah, avoiding slander, exactly.
Yeah. So, it highlights the importance of truthfulness and, being really careful about making accusations without,
Right.
solid proof.
Especially when it comes to something like that, which can really destroy somebody's life.
Right. Ruin the reputation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think this is a good place to pause.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
But there's still more to explore in Volume 4.
Yeah, there's more to come.
So we'll be back with Part 2 soon.
That's good.
Until then, keep those questions coming.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.
Okay, so where were we? Oh, yeah, we were talking about how Sunan An-Nasa'i, Volume 4, kind of acts like this guide to living an ethical life.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating how it touches on so many different topics.
It really does. I mean, we see everything from oaths and gift giving to training horses and protecting orphans' property. It even covers how to conduct business and care for animals.
It's like a manual for navigating all these different areas of life and always doing so ethically.
Exactly. And that's where we start to see this idea of ihsan woven throughout the text. Remember, we touched on this earlier. Ihsan is often translated as excellence or doing good, but it has this much deeper meaning as well.
Right. It's not just about doing the bare minimum. It's about this genuine desire to do what's right, what pleases God, even in those seemingly small, everyday actions.
Exactly. And that reminds me of that hadith where the prophet, peace be upon him, talks about how God prescribes ihsan in all things.
Oh, yeah, the one about slaughtering animals. It's a powerful example, right?
Yeah.
Even in an act that might seem harsh, there's this emphasis on minimizing suffering, performing it with skill and compassion.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that all creatures deserve respect, even in those situations where, we have to take a life for sustenance.
It's really about extending that sense of ihsan to our interactions with other people, too. I love that hadith where the prophet, peace be upon him, says, "None of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself."
That's one of my favorites. It highlights the importance of empathy and compassion, treating others with the same kindness and consideration that we want for ourselves.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity
Yeah.
and striving to create a society based on mutual care and support.
Right. And, speaking of social conduct, there's this other fascinating hadith in Volume 4 that I wanted to bring up. It's about the man who asks if he should kill someone because he saw him with his wife.
Oh, yes. A rather intense situation.
It is. But the Prophet's response is so interesting. He criticizes the man for even asking the question. It's a powerful reminder that Islam promotes justice and due process, not vigilante violence.
Absolutely. Even in a situation where someone feels deeply wronged, there are proper channels to address the grievance, to seek justice. It's not about taking the law into one's own hands.
It's about seeking a measured response, not resorting to rash actions fueled by anger or jealousy.
Exactly. And it also reflects the Islamic emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation. Even in the face of betrayal, there are avenues for resolving conflict peacefully, right? It's about seeking healing and restoration, even in those difficult situations. Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about something a little more practical. Inheritance in financial matters. Volume 4 really gets into the details of managing one's estate in an ethical way.
Right, it's like this ancient guide to Islamic finance and inheritance law. It's quite fascinating how much detail it provides.
And it all stems from this idea of fairness, ensuring that wealth is distributed justly. And it's interesting because the Prophet Muhammad himself didn't leave behind any wealth or property. He didn't even write a will.
That's right. And it's such a powerful statement, isn't it? It really reinforces the idea that his focus was on his teachings, his legacy, the community he built. Worldly possessions were not his priority.
Yeah, it emphasizes detachment from material wealth and that whole concept of charity that's so central to Islam. But if he didn't leave a will, how was his property distributed?
Well, that's where the Islamic inheritance system comes in. It's a detailed framework designed to ensure fairness and social responsibility.
It lays out exactly who inherits what portion of the estate, right?
Exactly. And it includes everyone, spouses, children, parents, even distant relatives. It's designed to prevent disputes and ensure everyone is taken care of.
It sounds pretty complex, though.
Oh, it can be. There are specific calculations and guidelines, but the core principle is to distribute wealth justly and protect those who are most vulnerable.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know we touched on this earlier, but can you remind us about that hadith where the man wanted to give all his wealth to charity?
Oh, yeah. The Prophet advised him to keep some for himself and his family, highlighting this idea that charity shouldn't come at the expense of our own well-being or responsibilities.
Right, it's about balance. We can't neglect our own needs and those of our family in the pursuit of charity.
Exactly. And true generosity comes from a place of abundance, not from depriving ourselves or those we're obligated to care for.
Now, there's another concept in this volume that I found challenging, to be honest.
Well,
The right of a former slave owner to inherit from their emancipated slave. How do we make sense of that today?
yeah, it's definitely a concept that needs careful consideration within its historical context. We have to remember that slavery was a deeply ingrained social institution at that time, and this was part of a complex process of transitioning away from that system.
I see. It's a reminder that while these teachings offer timeless wisdom, their application might require thoughtful adaptation as societies evolve.
Exactly. We have to engage with these texts critically, recognizing that interpretations may change as our understanding of things like human rights progresses.
Okay, so I want to circle back to this idea of Ihsan excellence or doing good that we were talking about earlier. It's a theme that seems to pop up again and again in Volume 4.
It really does. Ihsan is foundational in Islam. It's about going beyond just following rules. It's about infusing every aspect of our lives with virtue.
It's about bringing that intentionality and mindfulness to everything we do.
Exactly. And it's a beautiful reminder that our actions are not just about outward compliance. They're about cultivating that inner goodness, striving to embody Islamic values in every part of our lives.
It's about aligning our inner and outer worlds.
Beautifully put. And that reminds me of that hadith about the horse's supplication. Have you come across that one?
The one where the horse prays to God? Oh yeah, it's amazing. It's like this beautiful reflection of how everything in creation is interconnected.
Right. And the content of the prayer is so powerful. It's about asking God to place them in the care of a kind and compassionate owner.
It really makes you think about our responsibilities towards animals.
It does. It challenges us to treat all creatures with respect and kindness, recognizing that our dominion over them is not a license to exploit them.
It's about remembering that animals have inherent value and deserve ethical treatment.
And it speaks to that broader Islamic principle of extending mercy to all living things, not just humans.
Okay, now I know we've talked about jihad a bit already, but I feel like it's such an important and often misunderstood concept that it deserves a little more exploration.
I agree. There's so much nuance to it that often gets lost in translation.
So just to recap, Volume 4 emphasizes that there are multiple forms of jihad, right?
Yes, it's not just about armed struggle. There's the greater jihad, which is that internal struggle against our own desires, our weaknesses, our ego.
Right, that constant striving to become a better person.
Exactly. And in fact, many scholars argue that this internal jihad is actually the most challenging and important form. It's about purifying our hearts and aligning our actions with Islamic values.
Now, I know Volume 4 also includes hadiths about fighting in the cause of God. What do those tell us about the concept of armed struggle in Islam?
Well, they provide ethical guidelines for engaging in armed struggle, emphasizing things like just cause, minimizing harm to civilians, and treating prisoners of war humanely.
It shows that even in the context of war, there's this emphasis on ethical conduct and minimizing suffering.
Absolutely. It's not about blind fanaticism or aggression. It's about defending oneself or one's community from oppression while adhering to strict moral principles.
And the decision to engage in armed struggle is not something to be taken lightly.
Not at all. It requires careful consideration, consultation, a clear understanding of those principles of just war that we were talking about.
It's a much more nuanced concept than the simplistic holy war narrative that we sometimes hear.
Exactly, and I think it's really important to remember that. Okay, now shifting gears a bit, let's talk about something else that's highlighted in Volume 4. The severe consequences of falsely accusing someone of adultery.
Yeah, that one really stood out to me. It really stresses the importance of protecting people's reputations and avoiding slander.
It does. False accusations can have devastating consequences, both for the individual and the community. Islam places a high value on truthfulness and safeguarding people's honor.
It's a reminder that our words carry weight and we should use them responsibly, avoiding harmful or malicious statements.
Absolutely. And it's also about recognizing our collective responsibility to protect one another's reputations and to stand up for those who are unjustly accused.
Okay, now let's talk about something a bit more lighthearted. There's this lovely hadith about the importance of giving a wedding feast, even if it's just a simple one with a single sheep.
I love that one. It speaks to the importance of celebrating life's milestones with our community.
It's about sharing those moments of joy, no matter how simple or grand the celebration might be.
Exactly. And it highlights that Islamic emphasis on hospitality and generosity, strengthening social bonds through shared meals and celebrations.
It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes the simplest gestures can be the most meaningful.
Okay, now I want to touch on something a bit more complex. Do you remember that hadith where the man sees a trace of yellow perfume on his wife's garment and asks the prophet if he should kill her?
Oh, yes. That one was a bit intense.
It was. It deals with the issue of suspicion and jealousy within marriage. But the prophet's response is so insightful. He reminds the man that his wife is entitled to enjoy her life and that wearing perfume doesn't automatically imply wrongdoing.
Right. It's about trusting our spouses and not letting jealousy poison the relationship.
Exactly. And it encourages open communication. If there are concerns, address them directly rather than letting suspicion fester.
It's a reminder to treat our spouses with kindness and respect, recognizing their individuality and allowing them space to live their lives within the boundaries of Islamic teachings.
Now, that hadith reminds me of another one about a man who divorces his wife 3 times and then regrets it. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yes. The Prophet advises him to observe her waiting period and let him know when it's over.
It's a subtle but important detail, right? It suggests that even amidst divorce, there's still a possibility for reconciliation.
It's not always about completely cutting ties. Sometimes it's about leaving that door open, allowing for forgiveness and a potential reunion.
Exactly. It reflects that Islamic emphasis on preserving marriage whenever possible, seeking reconciliation rather than rushing into permanent separation. It's a reminder that even in the most challenging situations, there's always hope for healing and restoration.
It all ties back to that idea of Ihsan, doesn't it? Approaching even the most difficult situations with grace and compassion.
It really does. It's about embodying those Islamic values, seeking understanding and forgiveness, even when things get messy.
It's about approaching life and all its complexities with a spirit of love and compassion.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a perfect note to transition to our final part of this deep dive.
So I think one of the biggest takeaways from Volume 4 is how much it emphasizes intention. Like, it's not just about the actions themselves, it's about the heart behind them.
It really is. And that concept of intention, or niyyah in Arabic, is central to Islamic teachings.
Right, like it's that driving force that gives our actions meaning, especially in the eyes of God.
Exactly. A small act done with sincere intention for God's sake can be more meaningful than a grand gesture without it. It's about aligning our inner and outer worlds, making sure our actions reflect a heart that's striving for goodness.
It makes me think about that hadith about the man who died in battle because his sword recoiled. A tragic accident, but he was still considered a martyr.
Yes, because his intention was pure. He wanted to fight for a just cause, and that's what mattered.
It's a powerful reminder that God sees our hearts, even when things don't go as planned.
And that even in those difficult moments when the outcome is unexpected, our sincere intentions can still be rewarded.
And there's that other hadith about the man who wanted to give all his wealth to charity.
Oh yeah, the prophet advised him to keep some for himself and his family.
It shows that even in our generosity, we need to be wise and remember our responsibilities.
It's about balance. Charity is encouraged, but not at the expense of our own well-being or the well-being of those who depend on us.
It's a good reminder for us today, living in a world that's so focused on material things and outward appearances. It's easy to lose sight of our true intentions.
Definitely. And that's why these teachings are so important. They remind us to slow down, reflect, and make sure our actions are in line with our values and with pleasing God.
So it's not about checking things off a list. It's about cultivating a way of being, a state of heart that seeks goodness in every aspect of life.
Beautifully said. It's about that constant striving to live a life that reflects Islamic values, and I think that's a beautiful message to take away from Volume 4.
I agree. This deep dive has been incredible. It's amazing how these centuries-old teachings are still so relevant to our lives today.
They offer us so much guidance and wisdom for navigating the challenges of life, no matter what era we live in.
And for me, one of the key takeaways is that Islam is not just a set of rules or beliefs. It's a way of life that permeates every aspect of our existence.
Absolutely. It's about bringing that awareness of God, that desire to please Him, into everything we do, from our personal relationships to our work, our finances, our interactions with nature. It all matters.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Take these teachings to heart. Let them inspire you, challenge you, and guide you on your own unique journey.
Remember, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding is a lifelong process. Keep seeking, keep reflecting, and keep striving to live a life that embodies the beauty and wisdom of Islam.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Sunan An-Nasa'i, Volume 4. We hope you'll join us again next time as we continue to explore the rich tapestry of Islamic teachings.
Until then, peace be upon you.